hasn't Formula One been awesome lately?
It's a landmark day for Lando! Lando Norris wins for the first time in Formula One! It's victory in Miami!
I love you all.
Max Verstappen will take back the top step, and he beats Lando Norris by 0.7 of a second.
I have to work hard for that.
Charles Leclerc wins the Monaco Grand Prix to achieve his dream.
Three different winners from three different teams in the past three races. That's not happened since 2021, when Max Verstappen won in Zandvoort, Daniel Ricciardo took the spoils at Monza, and Lewis Hamilton was victorious in Sochi. So, do we have a title fight on our hands in 2024? Welcome everyone to F1 Nation. I'm Tom Clarkson, and joining me shortly to preview the Canadian Grand Prix is 1996 world champion Damon Hill. But first, let's talk about the news that Esteban Ocon and Alpine have agreed to part ways at the end of the season when his contract expires. Now, speculation around Ocon's future had been growing in recent weeks, and it ramped up again after team principal Bruno Fama said there will be consequences for his crash with teammate Pierre Gasly in Monaco. Alpine insist that incident is not what led to their decision. But let's find out more with Fred Ferret, F1 reporter at French newspaper L'Équipe. Fred, it's great to have you on the show. So, why have Alpine and Ocon decided to go their separate ways? What can you tell us?
I would say that this is the end of a couple. So there will be mystery for a long time between the two of them. But for me, it's not, and maybe for you either, and for all the listeners, we all knew that one of the French will have to leave before the end of the year to find a seat elsewhere to secure his future in F1, because both of the French drivers deserve a seat in 25.
But Fred, why Ocon and not Gasly then?
Because maybe Esteban has already worked heavily on finding another seat, and Alpine was not pleased. And we can see since the beginning of the French couple, it hasn't worked well, not at all. And especially in these days where every one of them has to prove to the whole world that he deserves a seat for next year. They're fighting like hell, but they don't have a car to fight. So when you're only 12 or even 19, it's difficult to move ahead on the grid. So they're maybe over driving sometimes. And that's why they're doing mistakes.
I have sensed that there's been a bit of frustration, increasing frustration at the team. I mean, let's cast our minds back only a couple of races to Miami. Do you remember that opening lap when they were side by side for what felt like ages? And you could hear the sort of tension coming from the Alpine garage at the time. I mean, how has the news been received in France about Ocon leaving?
It has been very tough for Esteban, because in France, suddenly Esteban was the kind of the best guy to be married to. We say in French, le gendre idéal. He used to be like that, but there were some heavy bashing on Esteban about the accident in Monaco. So it was not a surprise that everyone was talking on Monday, okay, he's going to be fired for Montreal and then he will come back for Spain, which is not relevant because it's not possible to get a driver out because there are contracts existing. So you can't ban a driver for a race unless he says, okay, Alpine is a bad team. I don't want to drive anymore for Alpine, which is not the case. Okay, they had an accident, but I'm pretty sure that you know that he's a Mercedes contracted guy. So you can imagine that Gwen Lagrue and Toto Wolff are reading the contract very thoroughly. And I'm pretty sure that they were aligned that you're not allowed to skip my driver from a race unless there is a FP1 coming for a young driver. So maybe Jack Doohan will drive on a Friday morning instead of Esteban soon. That's the possibility. I think that will be the only punishment for Esteban for that incident between him and Pierre.
You mentioned that he's a Mercedes driver. Gwen Lagrue, who looks after the young drivers there, and Toto Wolff managing his career. There is, of course, that second seat alongside George Russell at Mercedes next year. Do you think Ocon has got any chance of getting into that seat, or what do you see as his next move?
I think it's very difficult because now we thought that everything was connected with Max. Now we understand that Max won't move next year. So we have to wait. Then we have to wait for Carlos, but Carlos is waiting for a Mercedes seat or a Red Bull seat, which is not coming anymore. So where is going Carlos is the key for now the move of the drivers. If Carlos is going to Williams for 1 year, then there is an opening for Esteban in Sauber. This is the chance. And then there is also Haas, which is another move.
So Carlos Sainz is still the key to the driver market. No one else, the other dominoes can't fall until we know what Carlos is doing.
I think so. He's a winner of Grand Prix. Esteban too, but only one. He deserved his win in Hungary, but he's not as highly rated as Carlos. So Carlos moves and then the other moves.
So who is going to replace Ocon, and what does all this mean for Pierre Gasly?
What about the Zhou, who will be out of a seat? And we know that Gilles is very close to Renault. Gilles is a car manufacturer of China who is very close to Renault, car manufacturer in France. They signed a deal, I think, 1 year ago. And it would make sense to have a Chinese driver in, even if it's a French team, but who is related to a Chinese manufacturer. I think Zhou makes sense alongside Pierre. And we also forget that we have another French driver whose name is Victor Martins. He's not delivering well at that time in F2. He's suffering like hell. But we can see glimpses of very good things coming up now. And he was one of the favorites of the championship. And I think that he can recover. And if he wins the championship, then he is the perfect candidate to be on the seat of Alpine. And maybe Pierre will move too. I don't have any clue of what he will be doing.
I think the team will want to retain Pierre. Zhou actually ticks a lot of boxes because he was part of the Alpine young driver program, and they want to prove, particularly after everything that happened with Oscar Piastri, that there is actually a way through to the Formula One team. He did an FP1, I think it was in Austria, 2021. I think was the first time he appeared at a race weekend. That was in an Alpine. So he's got all the links. He's also got the link to Gilles, as you say. So I wonder if Zhou actually is in pole position to replace Esteban. And Zhou and Pierre Gasly, I think, is not a bad lineup for them.
You must not forget that Mick Schumacher is pushing like hell to come back in F1. And as he is driving on the WEC side of Alpine, it would also make sense to bring him back. And Bruno Famin says that he's more talented than we think. That's his words.
So there's Mick, and then of course there is Jack Doohan as well, who's doing those tests in the 2-year-old Alpine. He was at Zandvoort, wasn't he, just over a week ago, and apparently was very impressive as well. So actually, even without Ocon, Bruno Famin has a lot of options, doesn't he?
But not the best one, I would say. When you were supposed to have Alonso or Piastri alongside Ocon 3 years ago, and you end up with a Gasly Zhou or Gasly Schumacher lineup, I wouldn't say that is the best one.
Well, look, how do you think Ocon is going to deal with the remainder of this season now?
I think Bruno Famin will have to be a very clever manager, because now it will be him and only him. You know the drivers more than me, and now he doesn't have to click all the boxes to drive alongside his teammates. So now it's only for me, and I have to prove myself. Sorry, mate, but I will try everything to be in front of you.
I wonder if there might be some more Monaco, some more Portier corners on the opening lap in Monaco ahead of us. Maybe starting in Montreal this weekend, of course, which is a fast track, very little runoff in places as well. Well, Fred, it's been brilliant to get your thoughts. Thank you very much for your time. Travel safe out to Montreal, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Thanks, Tom, and see you in Montreal.
And you can read more analysis on Ocon's Alpine exit and what it means for the driver market on F1.com. If you're an entrepreneur who wants to hear a little more of this, then you need Shopify. the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify is revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide, thanks to its simplistic approach to online and in-person selling. It's got all of your sales channels covered, from a shopfront-ready POS system to its all-in-one e-commerce platform, and it even helps you start selling across social media marketplaces like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And what's great about Shopify is that it knows that every business is different. It doesn't matter if you're selling custom clothing or candle holders. Its industry-leading tools are designed to give you complete control over your brand without needing to learn any skills in design or coding. How great is that? And most importantly, it helps build your confidence to take your business to the next level. It's incredibly empowering for entrepreneurs, no matter where you are on your journey. Shopify is on hand to support your success every step of the way, with its award-winning help and an extensive business course library to guide you at every turn. It's time to get serious about selling and get Shopify today. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/nation, all lowercase. Go to shopify.co.uk/nation to take your business to the next level today. Shopify.co.uk/nation. Now, let's look ahead to the Canadian Grand Prix with 1996 world champion and former winner around the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, Damon Hill. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for reminding me about Canada. I thought you were going to say Monaco then, and I thought, no, I didn't win Monaco. But anyway, it's great to be back, and it was great. And I know that some people thought that the Monaco Grand Prix was a little bit samey, but I didn't. And I can give you a long reason why that is. But you're right. It's great to get another winner. Charles, absolutely fantastic to win as a Monegasque. That's the first time that's happened for 93 years, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's Louis Chiron you're talking about. But in the World Championship era, since 1950, of course, it has never happened. But did you enjoy Monaco then?
I always enjoy Monaco, but I have to say I went not working with Sky. I went as a corporate person doing stuff, talking to guests and so forth. And I was able to take it in a bit more. And maybe it was because I was quaffing champagne on a balcony overlooking the climb up to Massenet, and I had a fantastic view of all the yachts in the harbour. Maybe that's what slanted my opinion of the Monaco Grand Prix a bit. But I thought it's fantastic, and I got chills down my spine when qualifying was on, and it was just great to see a Monegasque victory. What a fairy tale story.
Yeah, it was a feel-good win, as was Lando's back in Miami just a couple of races ago as well. So, Damon, do you think we have a championship battle on our hands? Because just 24 points separating Ferrari and Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship now, and really only 31 separating Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. I mean, how do you read the situation?
I definitely think it's game on. I think that there's two teams that are showing pace and closing the gap on certain circuits to Red Bull. I think you give Red Bull the right kind of track, and I think it might be hard to catch, but definitely Ferrari, McLaren. Don't forget, they've both got two drivers who can attack. I'm not sure you can say that of Checo. So a little bit one-legged at the moment, Red Bull, if they want to defend. So Checo's going to have to really... I mean, it's no good being 3/10 away from Verstappen anymore because so many cars can jump in that gap. The gaps have become smaller and smaller. So points-wise, you can see that it's diminishing. Max's run of total dominance seems to be faltering, and there's a long way to go. It's such a long season. I just think you won't even remember Monaco by the time we get just past the British Grand Prix.
Unless you're Charles Leclerc.
Well, hopefully he'll be thinking of winning more. He doesn't want to stop there. So yeah, he might be thinking about, he will never forget Monaco, and he will live, as I said, he will be Saint Charles of Monaco now for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I'm figuring there's going to be a corner named after him, isn't there, on the track? But in the debriefs in Milton Keynes this week, where do you think their concern lies? In the Drivers' Championship or the Constructors' Championship? Because you've actually already said that Red Bull now need 2 drivers scoring at every race. And actually, I've got a couple of stats. If you look at just the last 2 races, okay, Imola and Monaco, consecutive weekends, Red Bull had a 1st and an 8th at Imola, and then they were 6th, and they had a retirement, of course, with Checo's huge crash on the opening lap in Monaco. Ferrari in those 2 races, 3rd and 5th at Imola, 1st and 3rd at Monaco. McLaren had a 2 2nd and 4ths at the last 2 races. So that consistency is what I think is going to threaten Red Bull for the rest of 2024.
Yeah, you could also thrown Oscar in there in Imola, because he actually technically qualified on the front row, didn't he? So, you know, there would have been much more points for McLaren, I would think, if they hadn't had that penalty.
So if we throw it forward then, this is our preview of Montreal coming up this weekend. Do you expect Ferrari and McLaren to be as competitive versus Red Bull in Canada as they have been at the last 2 races? I mean, let's bear in mind, Damon, that, you know, Max won in Canada last year from pole position.
Yeah, so the question really is, what sort of track? Now, I think that Red Bull seem to be locked in a little bit with their design concept on their car, and other teams seem to have moved a bit and made some progress. You could compare Imola to Canada. It's change of direction, need to use the curbs, straight blasts, you know, you need to be able to stop. That McLaren is very good under brakes. I was looking at some overlays, and they both, Lando and Oscar, seem to be able to take chunks out of people in under braking into corners. And that's what you need in Canada. And you need to be able to ride the curbs. And that's one thing that Red Bull were complaining about. You do need a slippery car, but the straights, it's medium speed corners, low and medium speed corners. And I don't think that is the Red Bull forte.
Where are the medium speed corners at Montreal?
When I say medium, I mean, you know, the chicanes on the exit, you're pulling a few, you know, bit of speed, but mostly it's braking into slow corners and then getting on the gas. And the Ferrari, much was made of their tiny turbo that seems to be able to spin up quickly. You imagine you've got a choice when they design these hybrid cars and with the turbo, you've got a choice of getting maximum boost at high revs, or you don't want lag. And so if you've got something that's large, it's more difficult because of inertia to get things to spin up. But if you've got a smaller turbo, you can get it to spin up, but ultimately it can't pump as much when it gets to the high revs. Somewhere like Mexico, where there's very thin air and all the turbos are maxed out, you know, they might suffer up there, but they seem to be able to get out of the corners with that design concept quite well, which you need to do in Canada and Monaco.
What about the ride then? They have resurfaced the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve since last year. So, I mean, it's notoriously bumpy, isn't it? Because they get those huge temperature swings. What is it? It can get down to -30 in December, January, and then it's +30 when we go there in June, isn't it? So they may have leveled out some of the bumps, which will help Red Bull, won't it?
Yeah, so that's really, it's always had undulations. I mean, even if they resurfaced it, they may have followed the contours of the ground underneath the tarmac. So yeah, I mean, you're right, huge temperature swings. You know, imagine the freeze thaw effect of the ground as it gets to minus whatever and then expands as the sun comes out. It's going to crack and move the ground. But I wouldn't say Montreal is bumpy. I would say it's got unevenness. So you need a car that is not upset by corner weights going out. So corner weights are like a table. You imagine you go to the restaurant and the bloody thing's wobbling all over the place. You know, that's because it's rigid, and any tiny unevenness means that it wobbles and stuff. You know, you need all 4 wheels on the ground to get the most traction and grip. But one of the other features of Canada is being able to ride the curbs, which we saw in Imola and we saw in Monaco. There's time there, because if you can let the car not be upset by that, then you can take a tighter line. You can literally cut the corner. So you need to be able to do that. And if the car's upset, which seems to be what Red Bull are saying, and it may be because they've got the suspension geometry set so that there is less movement of the platform. They've got this extreme anti-dive, anti-squat set up on their suspension. It may be the torque is a little bit of potentially that affecting it in these circuits where you have, you know, you don't get much compliance and you need to get a bit more driver feel. It could be that is also putting them off a little bit when it comes to places like Canada. But we have got ahead of ourselves a couple of times before with Red Bull. But it definitely looks like Max is struggling to get. I mean, at Imola, you could argue it was all looking desperate until he pulled off an amazing lap in qualifying. So he's able to do it.
Yeah, but the difference was hundredths of a second at Imola, wasn't it? Let me quote Max now from Monaco. He said, "I can't touch any curbs because it just upsets the car too much. It's not something new. We've had this problem since 2022. But with everyone catching up, when you're not improving your weakest point, you get found out." So I think it is part of the car concept, as you say.
Yeah. So, I mean, Adrian, I believe, was heavily involved in the suspension design of this, but he probably knew that the big gain would come from being able to control the platform aerodynamically for this ground effect type cars. And that was of more benefit than being able to ride the curbs. And for a long time, they've had an advantage. It probably didn't have to muller the curbs. He could just avoid them and still be quick. But now they're catching up. He's going to have to try and hustle it and wants a bit of ride over those curbs.
I remember him coming on the radio in last year's race as he was cruising to victory ahead of Fernando Alonso. He came on the radio and said, "I was almost knocked out over that curb."
Yeah, but they have these very cozy headrests now, which they didn't have when I was racing quite so much. And so, any movement of the car just whacks your head. It's good in a heavy shunt, but not when you're doing 60 laps around a track, which is quite bumpy because you get knocked around a bit. But I do remember one of my favorite photographs, Tom, is of turn 2 of my car. I'm using all the curb and I've got the one wheel over the curb and on the grass. And I managed to find a way to hook the car so that it didn't hit the bottom of the car on the curb, but I just managed to use more curb. In fact, I went right over the curb. So I was only really 2 wheels on the track, but I found about 3/10 or something around there. And it used to hook the back of the curb and just hold the car in. It was absolutely brilliant. It's a great photo and I love it because it's 2 wheels on the grass, but I look very happy.
That's free advice.
It's totally irrelevant to them now because they won't be able to do it. Because
why not? Because of the shape of the curbs now.
Yeah, I think the car and also the underfloor as well. It's not possible to get across like I could.
One of the things I always notice in Montreal when I'm walking/running the track, depending my mood, is how blind a lot of the corners are, right? So, you've got these chicanes. And, okay, let's talk about the last couple of corners, that last chicane, the Wall of Champions. I'm sure you didn't go near the Wall of Champions, Damon. Oh, hang on. But yeah. What is it like? What is it like on the approach to some of these high-speed chicanes, right? You're doing 300 kph more. How difficult is it to judge your braking point?
The section after turn 2, when you go up the hill and you've got that little chicane, now that is very disconcerting, that corner, because the road drops away, you drop down into a chicane, bit of a corkscrew, and then you have no runoff. There's a barrier there, and you quite often see cars getting very close to that. And as you accelerate out of that, it's totally blind. You cannot see around that corner. And then you arrive into the next chicane and you can see it all. So there's not too much of a problem. There's a bit of gravel runoff. But as you come out of there, again, the straight is not straight. It's curved. But eventually you can see all the way to the next chicane. You go under the bridge and there's shadows. So there's a dip. You want to keep the car left, but you can't really see where the edge of the track is, and you can't really see where the dip is, and your eyes are moving to the right. So you're in the corner of your eye, you know where the left side of the track is, but you're looking at the apex for the right-hander coming up. So there's a lot of unevenness, but once you get to the hairpin, you can see it. You can see for miles. Literally, you come out of the hairpin, you see all the way down to the pits. So it's all pretty open there.
All right, but then that last corner, why do so many drivers, champions, get spat into that final wall on the outside? What is it about that corner?
If I knew that, I wouldn't have crashed into it. It could be that.
It's a hell of a roll call, though. You, Michael Schumacher, Jacques Villeneuve, Jenson Button, you've all been in it.
We all came out in a rash, didn't we? It was incredible. Suddenly there was this need to crash on this wall. And as you get very close to the wall, there's dust. So there's nowhere for the dust to go. So it builds up really close to it. And somehow you seem to be sucked into it. You get to within 6 inches of it. And suddenly, before you know it, you're sucked into the damn thing.
And I wonder this year, with the lap times being so close, 1-2 tenths, enough to separate, 3 rows on the grid, I think we might see a little bit of action at the Wall of Champions again as people explore the limits. So look, final thought on Red Bull. We're all going to be watching with eagle eyes to see what the ride is like over the curbs. What is the new track surface going to be like? But DRS is vitally important here, particularly that last straight line from the hairpin down to the last corner. And the Red Bull is very efficient with the DRS open, isn't it?
Yeah, you could argue maybe because of the last, I know he got away with it in Imola, but, DRS was not such a factor in Monaco. So they lost one of their big advantages, Red Bull. So definitely that will be back again for them to use in Canada.
Now let's talk all things Williams. Are they on the up? Because they claimed their first points of the season in Monaco, with Alex Albon finishing P9. That moves the team up to P8 in the Constructors' Championship, and crucially above Alpine. And I'm delighted to say that we're joined now by the team's chief engineer, Dave Robson. Dave, great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Nice to be here, Tom.
That was a great result for you guys in Monaco. I feel it's been a little while coming. What impact has that had on the mood in the team, first of all?
It has been a little while coming. I don't think we can deny that. But to get off the mark in Monaco, I think was a great boost for everyone. It was obvious for all of us at trackside that getting into Q3 and then scoring some points was really important, and you could sense maybe a small hint of relief, but also a great deal of pleasure in that. And then back here in the factory, it was equally evident on Monday morning that everyone had a little bit of a spring in their step and is happy we're on the move and ready to go and score some more points in the coming races, hopefully.
Now, look, tell us about the magic that you produced in Monaco, because it hasn't been a great track for you guys in recent years. So what was different this time around?
Yeah, so a couple of things, I think. Firstly, I think the FW46, so this year's car is better around those kind of corners than recent cars, and we made a deliberate effort to design it that way. And I think we'd seen glimpses of it in similar kind of corners in other circuits, but that wasn't enough to score points at those. So we were started off with a good car in Monaco this year. On top of that, we were able to make some setup changes along the way. Now, that's not always easy to do in Monaco, but we had the track time, we had the reliability, and crucially, we had the support of the simulator back here. Often it's quite hard to simulate Monaco, but actually we seem to be in a good position there. So we got some useful input Friday night. Alex did some setup work on Saturday in P3, and that made a good step forward and made a difference to his pace. And then finally, I think the big thing was that in qualifying, we got all the big decisions right. It's very easy in Monaco to get it wrong in qualifying, particularly in Q1 when there's so many cars out on track. You're never quite sure what run plans people are going to do, but we managed to work our way through that. And Alex did a great job. And then in Q3, once we got there, we were able to do a slightly different run plan to everyone else, which meant quite unusually, Alex pretty much had Monaco to himself for that final run on new tyres. So we were able to give away maybe a small amount of track evolution, but it meant he could really get the tyres in the window he needed. And fair play to him, he made the most of it and nailed a great lap.
Sounds like you nailed it.
I think we probably did. There's a lot of planning that goes into that, but there's also quite a lot of luck. We're trying to second guess what everyone else is going to do. But yeah, I think we can be pretty pleased and proud with how we dealt with qualifying on Saturday. Yeah.
It's a bit like musical chairs, isn't it? You need to grab a chair, and the chairs are given out on Saturday, and then you just sit on it all of Sunday.
Yeah, that's right. I guess this year it was with the red flag on lap 1, it was even more like that. But yeah, absolutely, the hard work for sure was done in qualifying.
Dave, a lot was made, I think. I'm going to try and get you to dispel some popular mythology about the car. It seemed the last year the car had low drag, which was helpful in some places, but not enough downforce. Have you traded some of that slipperiness now for straight line speed and recovered some downforce? Is that where progress is coming from?
There's a little bit of that. On Alex's car, we had a brand new rear wing in Monaco is a pretty big wing, and the lower elements was pretty huge. So we definitely in Monaco trim, we made quite a big effort to maximize the downforce on the car. Generally, it's true as well. We've got more downforce and more drag than we've had in the last year or two. We've also made quite big efforts in the way we design the suspension, particularly, well, the front suspension. We get the rear from Mercedes, but the front suspension is quite different. And the way we've gone about designing some of the aero characteristics is different to the last couple of years, which I think has really helped in those low speed corners.
Because we were talking about that before we came on about the Red Bull and much is being made about their inability now to ride curbs and stuff. But that the gain they have is the control of the platform. Is that a fair assessment?
It could be. I can't speak for Red Bull, but absolutely we put a lot of effort into being able to ride the curbs and also control the car over the sort of the slight crowning of the road and the gradient you experienced turn 5, turn 6, particularly in Monaco. So we definitely made some compromises. We gave up quite a lot of downforce to do that. But you know better than I do, there's no point in having the downforce on the car if the driver can't actually use it and exploit it. And I think we got that about right for our car, I think, at the weekend.
Dave, can we talk about your drivers and particularly Alex Albon, right? You have worked with some of the modern day greats. You've worked with at Williams, you've had George Russell, but then of course during your time at McLaren you worked with world champions. I mean, very simple question actually, just how good is Alex Albon? Because he's re-signed with the team long term. Tell us about his strengths.
I think he is exceptionally good. He's exceptionally quick. He's also very smart, I think, and his feedback that goes into those setups is really important, and he was extremely good throughout Saturday. The testing work we did in P3, as I said earlier, some drivers not a big fan of doing setup work in Monaco. They'd rather just be on the track and finding their own rhythm. But he was very open-minded, could see the potential benefits, and was very happy to do that test. And then dealing with the pressure in Monaco, when we got him into some free air in the qualifying sessions, he was able to nail it. And we've seen that routinely throughout the last couple of years. I think it was Silverstone last year. We put him in a very difficult position post red flag in Q1, I think, sent him out at the front of the queue after the red flag, and huge amount of pressure. He had one lap, otherwise we were out in Q1. And again, he nailed it. So he's got really good pace. He's got a lot of intelligence, works really well with his engineers. And so far deals with the pressure very well. So, you've heard James Vowell say it as well. He's got everything he needs, except the car right at this moment to be world champion. We just need to provide him with that car, which obviously over the next couple of years we're looking to do.
It's great, that you're making progress, because obviously Williams were my old team, so it's always interesting to see, and we kind of have a soft spot for Williams, but it's been a bit of a struggle. But there's reorganising. I get the sense that James has basically, and Pat Fry's arrived, and he's been saying it's you spend most of your time running around trying to find things. So there's so much to catch up with the efficiency of the team. There
is. I don't think we can deny that. I think maybe part of the problem was that we were denying it, or we were almost oblivious to it, if you like. Clearly James and Pat have brought their experience of other teams recently and have kind of demonstrated just how behind we are on some things. But the problem we're in right now, it's a little bit like riding your bike and trying to fix a puncture on it at the same time, so something's got to give. And at the moment, the pace of the car isn't quite where we would like it to be, and the pace of bringing upgrades to it's also not quite where we would like it to be. But there is an awful lot going on that will reap reward in the future.
There's no getting around it, is it, in F1 progress? The other guys are constantly making gains. So in order to catch up, you have to do double the work that they're doing just to catch up. I mean, you do the same amount of work, you're staying where you are.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But you've got to do all that work and still be well informed, and make sure that it's productive work you're doing. There's no point in being busy fools, as it were. So we've got to stay focused and make sure we keep doing that. And everyone is. But also we've got the big rule change coming up, which hopefully provides us an opportunity to catch up without having to work at 2 or 3 times the pace of everybody else.
You mentioned being busy fools. Is that a job of a performance engineer? Is to bring everyone back to remembering that they're there to make the car faster and they get a car that the driver can drive and all those things?
It is. I mean, that side of it is really important, and we've got some engineers who are experts at that, but it also takes the driver, I think, to remind people. It's very easy for some of the engineering team to get lost in simulation, for example, and we can't really simulate the driver. The fact that the driver's got to sit there and take those risks and how you deal with the emotional side of driving and how far are the drivers prepared to push. That is all massively important and contributes to the lap time you can actually achieve. So yeah, you've got to keep all that in mind, definitely.
It's very interesting hearing you say all that, Dave, because in the old days we used to do testing, so we'd go round and round, and as drivers, I promise you, a lot of drivers would just go, "You're just wearing me out. I'm not learning anything. We're not learning anything. We're just spending the money and burning tires and petrol, so what is the point of this?" And so yeah, it's now got to be more efficient. You've got cost caps as well, haven't you?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the cost cap is an enormous change that has to drive efficiency. But it's at the same time, you've still got to be data driven and do that work in the wind tunnel and the simulation and then try and layer it with the driver, hopefully through the actual driver in the loop simulator. But yeah, it's an exciting challenge, and it's interesting having that cost cap sort of lurking over you. You can't afford just to do everything. You've got to make some decisions and admit you can't do everything and leave some things on the drawing board, as it were.
Well, Dave, this is our Canadian Grand Prix preview, and we wanted your expertise to guide us around the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve as much as anything. Let's talk about the track first of all. Is it unique on the calendar, and what are the main challenges?
I think it is fairly unique. It's got some similarities with some of the corners in Monaco. There are some fairly serious low-speed corners. Turn 1, 2 is a very slow opening up to the lap. And of course, the hairpin at turn 10, incredibly slow. So there are a few things to learn from Monaco that we can apply. But unfortunately, all those lower speed corners are separated by some pretty long straights. So everyone will run much less downforce and drag than they ran in Monaco. And that makes it quite unique. You can run quite low downforce and drag, be pretty quick on the straights. Overtaking is relatively straightforward, certainly much easier than Monaco. You've also got to be able to ride the curbs. A lot of chicanes in Montreal that you need to be able to contend with. That can be pretty difficult. And also with the current tyres we have, getting temperature into the tyres can be very difficult. For this year, we've got a whole new challenge. So I believe the whole track has been resurfaced. We don't know currently very much about that. So as soon as we get some people on the ground, we can get that scanned and get a first sense of what it's like. Now, hopefully it isn't very bumpy if it's been relayed recently. Normally I think the harsh winters in Montreal can cause a bit of havoc to the tarmac as it ages. But if this is pretty new, then we might find that it's actually a very smooth surface. Bumps under braking aren't such a big problem. But depending on how rough the tarmac is, we might find that the tyres are quite a challenge to get going. So we might find the teams battling with that P1, P2, and then as the track starts to grip up, it should get a little bit easier.
How blind are you to the tarmac? I mean, you say that when you have people on the ground, you can start scanning it, but how much information do you have before you go?
We've got very little, to be honest. We know it's been done. We know there's some reasonably rigorous standards to which it has to be done. We know what they've done to the curbs, which is basically replace them with new versions of what was there before. But no, the tarmac itself, we probably get some early information from Pirelli, who will probably be there before we are. So they will take a scan and make some observations, but nothing overly sort of scientific before we actually get there.
Do any teams send people out early just to take a look at things like that?
They may do. We certainly went and had a look, say, at Vegas before we went there last year. Not so much the details of the tarmac, but certainly to get a sense of the place and make sure we knew what was around and what basic layouts of the roads were, the roads that would become the track. I don't know whether teams will have sent people out to Montreal. They may have done.
I think it's fascinating. I was going around Imola doing some filming, and I saw a guy pushing what looked like a kind of Hoover or trolley around the track. His job was to, I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I can't tell you." And so I said, you're measuring something, aren't you? It was either distance, but also they were measuring the roughness of the tarmac, but he was doing it offline. And I thought, well, I wonder why you're doing it offline, because that's not going to be of any interest to anyone, that bit. But maybe that has to do another lap and do on a racing line lap as well. But yeah, the detail is incredible. But I think there'll be a massive queue of people wanting to do the job to go to Montreal early, just to walk around the track and then go for a beer.
I'm sure they will. Yeah. Yes, I'd quite happily volunteer for that. I think Montreal's probably one of the best host cities we go to, I think.
It's a lot of fun. I love Montreal.
The forecast doesn't look great. I mean, the last 2 qualifyings we've had there's been wet. And of course, actually, Williams, you nailed it again in Q2 last year. Do you remember, Damon, that Alex Albon, I think you put on soft tyres when everyone else was still on inters, and Alex was fastest of everyone in Q2 by more than a second, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So are you doing a bit of a rain down?
I wouldn't object to it being wet. Quite a good result there in 2011 in the wet with JB, albeit not in a Williams. But it's
the longest race ever.
Yep.
My toes have just about thawed out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was long. Dave, I've got to ask that question about how much of it is the driver pushing for those decisions, and because you're not on the track, you're not in the car, you can look at the sky and say, well, what do you think? But really, is it the driver? Yeah,
I think definitely when the track starts to dry up and you try to fit slicks when it's damp or inters when it's crossover between the full wets and the inters, then absolutely I think the driver has to be completely involved in that. There's no point in sending them out with something they're not comfortable with, because you've got to be able to push. But the moment you leave the pit lane, there has to be just enough grip that you can push to generate the temperature, and then the grip will come and you'll get on that positive spiral. If you're too tentative, either because the driver's not confident or because we simply made the wrong decision, you very quickly spiral the other way and you just lose all temperature and lose all grip, and all you can do is pit and fit something else. So we tend to to start the discussion with the driver. We've got a sense of whether we think it's getting close to crossover based on the lap times that people are doing there and then on the inter, say, as it starts to dry. We know how we've set the car up and how we think it ought to react to running slicks in damp conditions, and whether we can generate the temperatures. And then we will have that conversation with the driver, and then between us we'll decide. Also, I mean, I think when you're a slow car in qualifying, you don't have a lot to lose. It's much, much more difficult when you're a quick car. Same as Q1 in Monaco. There's nothing worse than going with the fastest car in Q1 in Monaco and just spending 18 minutes in traffic and not setting a lap time. And it's kind of similar in those crossover conditions. If you get it wrong, you get it hugely wrong and you lose everything. Whereas if you're not really in the points or really deserve to be in Q3, you can take that chance, and when it comes off, it looks great.
You were talking about Jensen and that incredible Canada race where it swung backwards and forwards so many times, but I was in the Donington race with Ayrton, and he was, the thing is, he made the call. I don't know how he did it, but he knew what he could do in the wet on slicks, or whether it was time for wet tires, and there wasn't the information coming from the pit wall in those days. It literally was, what do you want, and he just knew. The seat of his pants told him when to change tires or when to stick.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately I never met or worked with him, but I wonder if that is just some special God-given talent, really. I mean, I think Jensen was very good at it, and we obviously had quite a few races where we benefited from him making those kind of calls. But I think even JB would be a little bit embarrassed if we tried to compare it to that Donington race. But
why not? He got it right. Absolutely. It was a masterpiece, wasn't it, in choosing the right tire at the right time?
In Montreal, absolutely.
And it seems that Alex Albon has got that feel that all the great drivers seem to have.
Yeah, I think he's got the feel, and I think he's got the trust in us, not necessarily to make the call, but to know that we're trying to guide him honestly with the information we have, and that's an important part of it. So he's open-minded to any situation, but yeah, he is very good at making that call as well. And I think it does just come down to, there's definitely a feel element to it, and there's also that understanding of that wider overview of what's my risk and reward here, which is also important to make the decision or not.
And you have got another driver there, Dave, who we've not mentioned, but Logan has been trying his very best. He's had some pretty bad luck as well. But in Monaco, he did say, look, I can't, that's it. I'm done. I've got the best I can out of myself. So you know where you are with Logan. How do you help Logan get some more pace?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Monaco, it's fair to say he didn't have the best selection of parts on the car. We just weren't able to provide him with some of the stuff that we were able to provide Alex. The rear wing is an example of that, but also his rear suspension setup was compromised just due to lack of some parts. I think in Monaco, actually, he did an incredibly good job. He didn't damage the car at all, and his pace was actually very good. The gap to Alex looks massive, but all those extra goes Alex got at it in qualifying make an enormous difference anywhere, but in Monaco more than anywhere else. So actually his pace was very good, and he drove really, really well. I think the cars should be the same. We should have everything on both cars in Montreal, so that should give him a much better choice, or a much better chance rather. I think it's still just a case of just encouraging him to be a little bit patient with things, build up the weekend from that first run in P1, not try and go too quick early in the weekend, particularly on this resurfaced track. There's a lot of learning for us and for the drivers there. Probably don't think too much about what you think you learned at Montreal last year, because that may not be relevant. So again, have that kind of sense of an open mind about how we might need to set the car up, and particularly if the tyres are difficult to work, that's number one priority. So there's definitely some things we can guide him with, and there's still that need for him to just be a little bit patient and allow things to happen. These cars are very punishing if you push them too hard. The cars and the tyres together, they can be quite difficult, and even in a qualifying lap, sometimes you need to pace manage around that whole lap. You can't push from turn one and still have all the grip you expected, and therefore the balance you wanted at the last corner. So it's very difficult to work out how you do have to pace it, but there's often a bit of that, and we sometimes talk about this. You actually have to kind of drive slowly to go quickly. You can't force it. You can't be sliding around everywhere, not on these tyres. It's really difficult for rookies coming in. It takes a huge leap of faith to effectively back off and expect to go quicker. It should be that sliding around is quick, but it's not.
Dave, just talking about pace management and Montreal, a quick word on brake wear. I know in the past, funnily enough, Williams have got caught out about 20 years ago with the brakes, and also just from a fuel point of view as well. Do you have to manage that over a dry race distance?
I don't think the fuel will be a big problem. It may depend on how much drag you choose to fit to the car, but I think in reality you can put more than enough fuel in it. It's just that normal trade of they want to put too much in and cart it around. So we might choose to be on the aggressive side and then save. Brakes, I think these days with the brakes material we've got, the sizes of discs and pads we're allowed to run, I don't think brake wear will be a big problem. Sometimes if you're stuck in a DRS train, so you're not, some of the airflow into your brake cooling is effectively compromised by the cars ahead, and you're using DRS a lot, that might cause some people to run the brakes hotter than they wanted, and the wear will accelerate. But I don't think we expect it to be a big problem. I think what will happen is there'll be a big need to manage the tyres in the race. We take the same very soft compounds we took to Monaco. So I think people will be saving brakes and fuel just as a byproduct of managing tyres in the race. And I think it'll probably all come together for everyone okay. I don't think there'll be any major issues towards the end of the race.
Good chance we'll actually have some DRS passes anyway, because not like Monaco, we're not going to get a queue of cars just following each other, I don't think, this time. But so do you have expectations going? Are you hoping to score again? You think you can get yourself in the points at a circuit like Canada?
I think it'll be a lot more difficult than in Monaco, but the momentum build up from getting those points and getting off the mark in Monaco does definitely increase the desire that everyone has to do it. And I think everyone will therefore be a bit more aggressive on a few things and realise that points aren't that far away if we can just push everything to its limit. So it'll be difficult, but if we get the choice of rear wing right and we get the tyre management warm up right, then there is a chance. I'm sure we'll be just outside the top 10 and therefore hopefully knocking on the door and just getting in there. It would be great to pick up another point or two and just keep that momentum building.
Dave, best of luck from all of us here at F1 Nation. Hope you have a really good weekend. And if you do get those points, you can always go and watch Snoop Dogg on the Sunday night, who's playing at the Bell Centre.
Okay, I'll get that in the diary.
You'll probably be on a plane back though, won't you?
Probably fast asleep.
And that doesn't beat the Rolling Stones, surely. I'm old school, I'm sorry.
Dave, thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting chat, and I'll see you out there.
Yep, fantastic. Good to talk to you.
This is an advertisement from BetterHelp. We're already 6 months into 2024. Where's the time gone? And as we hit the halfway mark of the year, It's the perfect time to stop and think about what you've accomplished. Life moves so fast, it's easy to get wrapped up in the day-to-day, but it's important to take the time to celebrate your wins along the way. So ask yourself, what are you most proud of in 2024 so far? And what are your goals for the rest of the year? If you're someone that might need a little help or nudge in the right direction when it comes to celebrating your successes or planning for the future, therapy can help you take stock of your progress and set achievable goals for the next 6 months. Therapy isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. It's also a great tool that empowers you to be the best version of yourself possible, all while picking up some positive coping skills along the way. Because the only way to really know what you want out of life is to get to know yourself first. With almost 5,000 therapists in the UK already, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a wide variety of expertise in mental health. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/F1Nation. That's betterhelp.com/F1Nation. Oh, great to chat to Dave, wasn't it, Damon?
Yeah, I like talking to engineers. I mean, I spent my life talking to engineers when I was racing, so it was the only thing that really was worth, your time, because their knowledge, the experience of racing is huge. And also what I found interesting about Dave was he was actually able to bridge that gap. That seemed to be what his job was to bridge the gap between reality and the factory. You can work in a factory, you can be getting all the numbers and you can say, well, my numbers are better than they were last week, but how does it actually translate when you take it to the track? This is what this is all about. What Formula One is all about is saying, okay, in theory, we've got this, but in practice, something else is happening. We don't understand it. We need to find out what it is that is the driver experience. Ultimately, they are the customer in a way, because if you don't provide them with a car that they can drive and get the best out of, then you'll never see the best of your product, of your design work.
Oh, Damon, you won 22 Formula One races, and now in retirement, you've become the Segway king, because I think what you just said leads us beautifully onto Aston Martin. And they appear to be struggling at the moment. Neither car scored in Monaco. They're now 52 points behind Mercedes, who themselves have been struggling this year, and they're only 20 points ahead of VCARB in the World Championship. I mean, what are the issues?
Well, I mean, I wonder whether it's to do with their new factory. I mean, because for most of last year, they weren't in their new factory, were they? They weren't. Where were they? Were they wind tunnel? They've only just recently sort of moved into all their new equipment, as I understand it. Are they stuck with the same wind tunnel, or have they got a different wind tunnel going? Tom, do you know?
They're in the throes of making a new wind tunnel on site.
Yes,
which is, I think, going to come on stream later this year.
You see, once you're trying to straddle two things, it's quite difficult, I think, for everyone. And I think that this word correlation you hear all the time is the key thing, is that whether the theory and the wind tunnel data and or the simulation equipment that you have actually matches up with what they're doing on the track. And if you get that correlation, you can then encourage the people to go, you're going in the right direction. We can see the results. Keep going. And it's the same with Mercedes. You have to say they've quite often come out and said the figures are good. It looks like it should be right. And then you go on the track, it's not working. So that correlation, that match up, I think it seems that McLaren are comfortable with it. They seem to be getting the results on the track that they were expecting. But Aston seemed to have faded a bit. They had a great leap forward, didn't they, at the beginning of last year? And then something has gone awry with the development side of things. They seem to have maybe got that correlation mismatch, maybe.
The team was saying in Monaco that, the issues are more low speed. And of course, that hurt them in Monaco. Although, and actually, Damon, this is something I wanted to ask you about. Fernando Alonso, yes, he got knocked out in Q1, traffic issues. But he's now been out-qualified by Lance Stroll for the last 3 races. Okay, I'm sure in his mind he breaks it down that there was traffic in Monaco, and then he had that crash in FP3 at Imola, which meant he didn't get a clean run. into Q1. So he can probably in his mind justify why that's happened at the last 2 races. But still, the fluctuating fortunes of Aston Martin are fascinating.
I'm not putting it down to old age just yet. I think anyone dare mention that, then they might be in for a little bit of a reaction.
I think they will be a little bit better than they were in Monaco. And let's not forget that Alonso qualified on the front row and finished second in the Canadian Grand Prix last year. So watch that space. Look, we now need to come up with our podium predictions. I know you love this part of the show. Who's your top 3?
Yeah, it's getting more difficult, Tom. That's the good thing, isn't it? It is getting much more difficult. I think Max will be back, even with his curb hopping issues.
Enough to win it?
I think it's going to be, weather, obviously, discount that factor, but it will be more difficult to win this for him. McLaren, I'm going to say, let's say Oscar is buoyed and has a little bit of a extra motivation, having seen his teammate win one, and he knew he was on the front row at Imola, and it's a similar kind of track from the demands of the car. Let's say Oscar could do it. Yeah.
Damon, that is a great shout. He's actually been the better of the 2 McLaren drivers at the last couple of races. He said after the race in Monaco that he thinks McLaren can be quick at any type of track going forward. Oscar Piastri, his first Grand Prix win.
What about an all McLaren front row in Canada? It can happen.
Wow.
It's not impossible. It's not plucked out of
So
the
your
sky,
podium is Oscar from Lando from Max. That's how I've interpreted.
Yeah,
what
that's
you've
going to
just
be
said.
a headache for McLaren, isn't it? Working out the strategy for those two when they're both leading. But they're going to be into a new problem.
Wow. So how do I follow that? I think McLaren are going to be quick. I'm with Oscar. I think they can be quick at any racetrack going forward. I think Ferrari will be slightly behind them. It's that unknown of Red Bull, isn't it? What can Max Verstappen do back in Canada? I think you're right. I think Max is going to be back. I think my money is on a Max Verstappen win with the 2 McLarens behind. I can't give an order, whether it's Lando P2, Oscar P3, but it could easily be the other way around.
I want to tell a little story. I'm not with Sky in Canada, but Jacques will be, my teammate from '96. And when we were racing there, the difference between a 1-stop and a 2-stop was negligible. And they kept on asking us, what are you going to do? And I was thinking, well, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I'll just do the opposite of whatever he does. And so he wasn't making a decision. So I went for a walk and I came back a lot later. And once I found out what he was going to do, I did the opposite. So there you go. 1-stop, 2-stop, doesn't particularly under there.
And it was so close, that 96 race between you and him. What was it? I think less than a tenth between you in qualifying on the front row. And I think you beat him by 4 seconds. There you go.
It was tight.
We've talked about the challenges facing the drivers and teams in Montreal this weekend. But what about the challenges facing our F1 fantasy team? Monaco wasn't a terrible weekend for F1 Nation Racing. Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Alex Albon and Yuki Tsunoda all helped us reach 175 points, and we did move up in the F1 Nation World Championship standings. Are you ready for it? We're now at the dizzy heights of P 139,092. But it's incredibly tight at the top. Paddock Here I Come leads the way on 2,209 points, just 1 point clear of Yellow Racing in P2, while Ford and Ferrari is only a further 5 points adrift in P3. Now, Damon sounded very confident about a McLaren front row and 1-2 in Canada, didn't he? So let's take his advice, and then we've got someone to blame if it all goes wrong. We're going to replace Charles Leclerc with Oscar Piastri. Sorry, Charles. Thanks for your win in Monaco, and I'm sure we'll have you back again soon. We're also replacing our 2 constructors. McLaren come in for Ferrari, and Dave Robson sounded optimistic about Williams' progress, so they can take VCARB's place. So that's a lineup of Piastri, Norris, Tsunoda, Albon and Ricciardo. Hopefully he can find some form at the scene of his first ever Grand Prix victory. With McLaren and VCARB as our constructors, let's see how we get on. And remember that F1 Fantasy is free to play and you can join our league at any time. Just visit the official F1 website or app and search for the F1 Nation World Championship 2024. And remember, you have until the start of qualifying for the Canadian Grand Prix to make any changes to your team. Well, Damon, it's been fab to chat. One last thing to look out for in Canada is that the FIA are going to be announcing the 2026 regulations. That's exciting, isn't it?
Yep. Oh, we like to know what the future holds, and there'll be a certain person who will be eager to get his hands on the regulations and see what he can find. And that person, of course, has recently announced he's going to be leaving Red Bull. My old designer friend.
Do you think, Damon, Adrian Newey has been waiting for the 26 rules?
Yeah.
Before deciding what he does in the future? I want to see what I'm dealing with here.
Yeah, he's like, he's able to see, like Superman can see through steel. He can see through regulations.
He can indeed. He's got form. I believe you. Well, Damon, thank you very much for your time, and to Dave Robson as well. It was great to chat to him. Qualifying for the Canadian Grand Prix starts at 4 p.m. local time on Saturday, with lights out for the 70-lap race at 2 p.m. on Sunday. And for your local timings, go to the official Formula One website or app, or just follow F1 on social media. A couple of parish notices for you. This week's guest on F1 Beyond the Grid is Liberty Media President and CEO Greg Maffei. I caught up with him in Monaco last week, and that's going to be available on your podcast app and the official F1 YouTube channel from Wednesday. You can also check out the latest F1 Explains podcast, which is looking into the new EA Sports console game, F1 24. And don't forget that you can be at an F1 race this season. Go to tickets.formula1.com to book your seat now. Well, thank you very much for listening. We will, of course, be back next Monday with our review of the Canadian Grand Prix. But for now, F1 Nation is produced by Formula One and Audio Boom Studios.